Hello guys, welcome. This is Deepika from wealthandhealthmastery.com, and in this video we are going to compare two AI companies. One is Nvidia and the other one is AMD. We're going to see which stock to buy in between these two companies. You cannot be investing in all of these companies, right? One way of investing in all these semiconductor companies is buying a semiconductor ETF, like Venex Semiconductor ETF can be one of the example. Besides that, if you have to choose between Nvidia and AMD, which company you will choose to buy? So we are going to decide that based on number of factors. We are going to take a look at their PE ratio, the PS ratio, the debt to equity ratio, the earnings, etc., the revenue growth. All of these things we'll take into consideration and we'll decide should you be investing in Nvidia or AMD. So currently Nvidia has not reported their quarterly earnings, but we are going to compare it with the information we have so far, which is the previous earnings report. AMD has just released the earnings last week, so we do have the latest earnings report from AMD. So let's take a look at the AMD earnings report here. You can see here there is a revenue growth of about 8.8%. So there is a revenue growth of 9% here, and the revenue for the last quarter is sitting at $5.83 billion. Now if you go over to Nvidia, the growth of revenue is at 262%, and they are sitting at $26 billion. So that is a huge difference. So revenues are at $26 billion and AMD revenue is at $5.8 billion. So if I go ahead and look at the revenue here, this revenue is currently at $26 billion and this is at $5.8 billion. And if you look at who wins among the revenue here, the company that wins is Nvidia. So I'm going to put Nvidia here. Revenue growth of this one is at 262%, whereas this is at 9%. Again, who wins here? Nvidia. So far Nvidia is winning because their revenue growth is at 262. If you have to buy, both of them are expensive stock at the moment based on the PE ratio, but if you have to buy one of these, you will look at who is growing at the faster rate, and clearly you can see here Nvidia is growing at the faster rate. So if I have to pick between Nvidia and AMD at this point, I'm going to pick Nvidia. Now the next important thing, we are going to see who's greater return on investment. So I'm going to go over to the financials here and we will compare the ratios. So you can see here the return on investment. You can see here the return on investment for trailing 12 months for AMD is at 1.33%, and the 5-year return on investment, it is at 15.63%. If you compare it with Nvidia, you can see here Nvidia return on investment is at 84.67 for the last 12 months, and it is at 26.88 for the 5 years. Now let's compare the two, 15 and 26. So I'm going to pick up for the last 5 years. Okay, so we can see here return on investment for the last 5 years. So Nvidia is sitting at 26.88%. So their return on investment is, let's say, 27%. And let's look at AMD here. AMD return on investment is 15.63%. So I'm going to choose 16% here. So far return on investment is greater for Nvidia. So here also Nvidia is winning here. So far Nvidia is winning this race. Now let's take a look at their sales growth here. Okay, so let's take a look at the sales growth, and the sales growth for the last 5 years is at 28.49, which is good for AMD. And let's look at the sales growth for Nvidia. It is at 39.06%. So even the sales growth numbers look good for Nvidia. So here I'm going to compare sales growth is at 39 for Nvidia, and let's look at for AMD, the sales growth is 28.49. Okay, so this is 28.49. So who is winning in the last 5 years? Again, Nvidia wins here. Now next important thing is debt to equity ratio. It means how much debt they have compared to the equity. Lower the number, the better. So the debt to equity ratio for, if I go here and compare these two, the debt to equity ratio is at 3.97, which is 0.03. Okay, 0.03 for debt to equity ratio for AMD, 0.03. And let's look at the AMD debt to equity ratio. And you can see here debt to equity ratio is at 17.22, and this is at 22.87. So there is a little bit on the higher side, 0.22. So this one is 0.22 and the other one is, so this one AMD wins. So their debt to equity ratio is less as compared to Nvidia. Now the next one is we have taken a look at the revenue, so I'm going to remove this figure here. Now let's take a look at the gross profit. So in order for me to look at the gross profit, I have to go to their financials, and let's look at the gross profit for Nvidia. Okay, you can see here the gross profit is at $20 billion for Nvidia. So I'm going to go ahead and put it $20 billion for Nvidia here, and let's look at the AMD gross profit, and we can see here, if I go to the release and let's look at the gross profit, there is at $2.8 billion. So if I go ahead and compare, this is at $2.8 billion. So if I compare the gross profit, also Nvidia wins. So Nvidia is far better company than AMD. AMD is number 2 right now, but AMD has a lot of gap between Nvidia and AMD earnings. So AMD has a lot to catch up. That's what I'll say about AMD. So far, based on these numbers, AMD is not the winner here. Nvidia is the winner. And if I go over to the PE ratio is the price to earnings ratio. If more, that means the stock is at the expensive side. If it is comparatively less compared to the industry standard, that means the stock is available at the cheaper rate. So if I go over to Nvidia here, you can see the price to earning ratio. The price to earning ratio is sitting at 61.89 for Nvidia, and AMD, it is sitting at 158. That means the price to earnings ratio means AMD is much more expensive stock as compared to Nvidia. So AMD is at 158. So this one PE ratio is at 158. That means it's much more expensive, and this one Nvidia is sitting at around 61.89. It is comparatively less than industry standard, whereas for AMD it is more than industry standard. So if I go here to PE ratio, this is at 61. So here also Nvidia wins. You can see here Nvidia wins. And now let's compare the price to sales ratio. Price to sales ratio for Nvidia is 33.05. It should also be less. So 33.05 for Nvidia. And the price to sales ratio for AMD is at 9.21. So that is comparatively very less. So in this case, the price to sales ratio for this one wins is AMD. Okay, so AMD wins. So out of all these numbers, comparing all these numbers, Nvidia is a clear-cut winner between Nvidia and AMD. So if you have to pick between Nvidia and AMD, I would definitely pick Nvidia. Nvidia is the #1 company in the GPU industry, in the AI industry, and AMD is behind it, but there's a lot of gap between Nvidia and AMD. So based on these numbers, return on investment, the debt to equity, the sales growth, the gross profit, the PE ratio, all these numbers tell me Nvidia is in a far better position as compared to AMD. And if you have to choose between these two stocks, I would definitely pick Nvidia over AMD. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to watch such kind of videos in the future, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any video from the channel. I'm going to see you tomorrow with another stock video, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much.